Bull. There's a name you didn't choose to remember today. It was simply there when you woke up, or when the silence became too much, or when a song played uninvited, and suddenly it was that person again. The way they were, the way they spoke, the way they looked at you as if you were the most solid thing in the world, and you stayed there. With that name, with that weight, not quite knowing what to do with it. Most people will call it longing. Others will call it attachment, and there's always someone who says you need to move on, that time heals, that there's someone better waiting in a place you haven't looked yet. And maybe part of you even believes it. But even so, that name remains, silent but present, like a root that no one sees, but that holds everything underneath. You are a Taurus, and Taurus doesn't forget by decree. Not because you can't, but because there's something inside you that hasn't truly been decided yet. And that difference between not being able to let go and not having decided is greater than it seems. It's the difference between a prison and a choice still open. Because Taurus doesn't feel emotion the way others explain it. You don't process it in your head first, you process it through weight, through time, through the texture of the things that remain. And when someone stays for a long time, when someone leaves enough of a mark, when someone becomes part of your routine, your habits, the way you wake up and how you go to sleep, that person is no longer just someone you liked. They become a structure. They become a living part of the architecture of your life. And structure isn't abandoned on a whim. Structure isn't undone because someone said it's time, that you deserve more, that there are other oceans to cross. Structure has a foundation, it has walls, it has everything you built with your own hands. So when people ask why you still think about that person, why you still carry that name within a silence you don't show to anyone, the answer isn't weakness. The answer is that you built something real. And what is real for Taurus has weight. What has weight demands respect. But here begins the knot that most Tauruses spend years unable to name. Because there is a brutal difference between what remained because it was true and what remained because you invested too much time, too much energy, too many parts of yourself to be able to simply let go. And Taurus confuses these two with a frequency that surprises even themselves. There's a word that Taurus rarely uses aloud, but it governs almost everything they do: investment. Not in the cold sense of spreadsheets or returns, in the living sense that when Taurus puts something of themselves somewhere, time, care, presence, that specific attention that only they know how to give, that place becomes theirs in a way that goes beyond logic. Not because they are possessive by nature, because they are essentially builders. And those who build don't abandon the work halfway through. They go all the way to the end, even when the end hasn't yet appeared on the horizon. Imagine a restaurant where the food has gone downhill for a long time, but it was there that you had the best conversations of your life. It was there that you celebrated things that have never been repeated in the same way. And even knowing that the experience isn't the same anymore, you keep going back. Not because the place has become good again, but because the memory of what was good still lives within those walls. And abandoning the place would be, in a way, abandoning the memory, abandoning the proof that it was real. And that for Taurus that was never simple, because you don't separate the place from the memory. You don't separate the person from what they represented. And what they represented is still alive inside you, even if they're no longer here. It was while searching for answers to this that I found this digital book, The Divine Path That Guides Your Zodiac Sign to a Life of Purpose. And what surprised me was how much it talks about what Taurus carries inside without being able to name it. About that specific confusion between real love and emotional investment that fear prevents from resolving. Not as a problem to be solved by willpower, but as an architecture to be understood honestly. Because when Taurus understands why they feel what they feel, they don't stop feeling. They begin to feel with more clarity. And clarity is the only real path to true security, which doesn't depend on any other person to exist. You're at a specific point in your life. You recognize something within yourself while listening to this. That name is still there. That weight is still present. Part of you truly wants to understand if what you feel is a sign or a habit, if that person still has anything to do with who you're becoming, or if you're carrying a structure that has already served its purpose. This understanding doesn't come with time. It comes from going deeper. The link is in the first pinned comment, but be aware, this content may be taken down. Click now and download your copy. Tell me in the comments, is there someone you still think about, even knowing they should have stayed in the past? And you never understood why that name still carries so much weight. There's something that someone's silence does to a Taurus that's almost impossible to describe to someone who isn't born under that sign. It's not a simple absence. It's not a void that time gradually fills until one day you realize it's full again. It's a reorganization, as if the days had learned to function around that specific presence, and now, without it, everything is still trying to align itself around something that's no longer there. You wake up and for a second, before full awareness arrives, there's an expectation you can't even name, a habit of presence that the body hasn't yet unlearned. You pass by a place and hope, almost involuntarily, that the memory won't hurt so much today. Sometimes it doesn't, but the space is still there. The chair is still set for someone who won't sit in it. And here's what no one tells a Taurus honestly enough. This isn't a sign that you haven't moved on. It's a sign that you've truly built something, that what existed between you wasn't superficial, wasn't fleeting, wasn't the kind of bond that dissolves at the first strong wind, that you don't love halfway, but there's a question that needs to be asked, even if it hurts to say it out loud. What does this continuous silence reveal about you? Not about her. Because Taurus has a very specific ability that few recognize for what it truly is. It manages to live in parallel, to continue life with full functionality, to work, to be present with the people around them, to smile when it's time to smile, and at the same time to carry a weight somewhere internal that rarely appears to the world. On the outside, everything is in order. Inside, that name still has an active dwelling. And that dwelling is organized, it's clean, it's waiting. As if Taurus, on some level that it itself cannot fully access, hasn't yet given the order to vacate. The problem isn't carrying burdens. Taurus knows how to carry them better than any other sign. The problem is when carrying burdens becomes the default state without you realizing it. When that person's inner presence begins to occupy the space that was meant for your own growth, your own choices, your own expansion. When you start measuring new experiences by the yardstick of what has already passed. When what could be the future continues to be compared to a past that honestly no longer exists in the way it was stored in your memory. And then comes the question that truly scares Taurus the most. Not the question, do you still like this person? That's easy. The question that scares them, the one Taurus avoids with all the skill and evasion they possess, is this. Do you still want this person, or do you want what they represented? Because representations can be found elsewhere, in other relationships, in other forms. But Taurus rarely stops to make this distinction honestly. For them, the person and what they represent have merged. They are the same thing. Letting go of one would be letting go of the other. And that seems like too much. There's something very specific that happens when Taurus confuses familiarity with belonging. You travel a path many times, and it starts to seem like the only possible path, not because others don't exist, but because you know this one by heart. Every curve, every stone, every place where the light hits differently in each season. This path has become a part of you, and abandoning it doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like a loss of direction. It feels like being without a map in the middle of a territory you don't recognize. But there is a difference between the path you have walked many times and the path that was made for you. And Taurus, who knows so well how to distinguish genuine gold from imitation in everything material, who has a precise radar for quality and authenticity in almost everything in life, sometimes doesn't apply that same discernment to the emotional, to what shines within the heart. If someone were to ask you today, at this very moment, without time to construct arguments, without the memory of everything that has been accumulated, without the weight of history, would that person still be the choice? Not the safest choice, not the most well-known, not the one that makes the most sense on paper, the real choice. This question carries a different weight for Taurus, because Taurus knows, somewhere very quietly and honestly deep inside, when something is genuine, when something is real, when something has the right texture, when something aligns with what it truly is. And sometimes this knowledge is so buried under layers of investment, time, emotional memory, and structures that took years to build that it seems impossible to access. But it's there. It always has been. What if that person is still your destiny, but doesn't mean what you think it means? Not in the sense that they will come back, not in the sense that the story still has a chapter reserved, waiting for the right moment, but in the sense that destiny is not synonymous with permanence, that some people enter Taurus's life not to stay, but to force Taurus to go to places within themselves that they would never visit on their own, in comfortable conditions. Because Taurus is a sign that only truly moves when it has sufficient reason to do so, when the earth trembles enough that standing still is more uncomfortable than moving. And certain people are exactly that earthquake, not to destroy, to reveal what lay beneath the surface that Taurus kept so well organized, so well cared for, so solidly constructed. There's something this specific person has done to you that no one else has done before. A place inside you that only they've accessed. A version of you that only appeared in this connection, perhaps more vulnerable, or braver, or more honest than you usually are. And maybe the central question isn't whether you'll stay with them or not. Maybe the question that really matters is, have you understood what they came to reveal? The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. Because there's a type of self-knowledge that Taurus can only build when they stop looking at the other person as the center of the issue and start looking at what that person's presence awakened within them. Not what they did, not what they said, not the choices they made, but what the encounter with them made visible, about their oldest fears, about their most ingrained patterns, about the version of themselves that was still waiting for permission to fully exist. And then the question changes completely. It's no longer, is she still my destiny? It's a much more powerful question. Who do I become based on what this destiny has revealed? This is precisely where most Tauruses get stuck longer than they should, because it's more comfortable to dwell on the question about the other person than to face the question about themselves with the same courage. It's safer to analyze what they felt, what they wanted, what could have been different if the circumstances were different, than to sit with their own truth in silence and ask, what did I really learn? And more importantly, what do I still need to learn to move forward? There is something that Taurus carries that few signs possess with the same depth, a genuine capacity to construct meaning from pain. When Taurus decides to understand, not just endure, not just survive, but truly understand, when it stops resisting what the experience has taught and begins to truly delve into that knowledge, it finds things within itself that were completely invisible before the earthquake. Resources it didn't know it had. Strengths it never needed to use because it was never challenged so much. A clarity about what it truly wants and who it truly is that only appears after familiar comfort has been gone for long enough. And that person, that name that still won't leave my head, may have been precisely the catalyst that forced this process to begin. Not as punishment, not as a trick of fate, as precision. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. There's a very specific mirror that this person held up to you during their presence, and what that mirror showed wasn't them. It was you, a version of you that Taurus rarely gets to see because they're always busy supporting everything around them, building everything for others, being the stability that the world around them seems to need so much. That mirror showed what was still incomplete within you, what still needed attention and care, what still needed to be built into the inner foundation before any new structure could begin with real solidity. And here's what's hardest to accept, because it demands a painful honesty. You may have truly loved someone. It may have been real, it may have been intense, it may have been the most honest bond you've ever experienced. And yet, that person's main function in your life may have been this: not to stay, but to reveal themselves. Not to build with you, but to force you to discover what you are capable of building. Because Taurus has a specific mission in this existence, a unique way of inhabiting the world, of creating lasting bonds, of generating abundance, not only material, not only concrete, but emotional, relational, spiritual. And this mission requires that it go beyond the boundaries of security that it has built as protection throughout its life, that it trust when there is no visible guarantee, that it open up when its oldest instinct tells it to close and protect. This person opened something up inside you, regardless of how it ended, regardless of the pain and unanswered questions that remain, regardless of how much it still hurts when the silence becomes too much and that name resurfaces. They opened something that was closed. And what you do with that opening from now on is what will define who you become. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. And so we arrive at the only place where this story can truly end. Not with "we stay together" or "we move on separately," because those two endings still place the other person at the center of the narrative. The only real ending that works for Taurus is one where he himself becomes the center. Not out of selfishness, out of honesty with what he came here to do. Taurus spent too much time building foundations for others, being the stability the world demanded, being the safe harbor that those around needed without asking, being the firm ground while everyone else navigated their own private seas. And in this vocation for support, for presence, for permanence, sometimes they forgot to ask about their own foundation. Is it firm? Is it built on what is true, or on what they were afraid to abandon even when it no longer served its purpose? The foundation that remains after this story shook everything up isn't ruin. It's what's left of solidity after what was fragile is gone. And Taurus, who knows better than any other sign how to build, how to solidify, how to transform what seems raw and difficult into something that lasts far beyond what anyone expected, now has in its hands the most honest chance of its life. To build something from what is real, something that you won't need any earthquake to prove is solid. The name you carry has weight, but that weight, when you finally understand where it comes from and what it came to do, can cease to be an anchor and become a foundation. The difference between the two is simple and profound at the same time. An anchor keeps you where you are. A foundation supports where you are going. And where Taurus is going, when he finally decides to go, when he allows himself to move forward with everything he has learned, with everything he has discovered about himself in this process, is always further than anyone imagined, including himself.